I remember the moment I was left out of the family meeting. My coffee cup froze midway to my lips as my father stood at the head of the dining table, announcing the new executive board of Reynolds Construction. The timber-framed rooms suddenly felt airless, the morning light harsh against the familiar wood-paneled walls where 3 generations of family photos hung. My father's voice, usually warm and booming, had taken on that practiced corporate tone, the one reserved for business associates, not family. His eyes swept past me as if I were invisible, landing instead on my younger brother Mark, who couldn't hide the flicker of triumph in his expression. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I sat completely still among my relatives, all dressed in matching navy suits like some kind of corporate army. The table that once hosted chaotic Sunday dinners now felt like a boardroom, cold and strategic. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I heard every name called but mine. My Aunt Caroline scribbled furiously in her leather-bound planner. Uncle James nodded approvingly. My cousin Eliza barely concealed her smirk behind her designer coffee mug. The company I had poured 10 years of my life into, the one Grandpa Joe had started in his garage with nothing but a toolbox and determination, was being restructured, and somehow I had become structurally irrelevant. These changes will position Reynolds' construction for the next generation of growth, my father concluded, closing the leather portfolio with an air of finality. The subtle emphasis on next generation wasn't lost on me, nor was the fact that apparently I wasn't considered part of it. I should have seen this coming. There had been whispers, closed-door meetings, sudden silences when I entered rooms. But I had buried myself in the work instead, managing construction sites, securing contracts, doing what I'd always done, proving my worth through results rather than politics. That morning, I learned how little that approach had served me. We'll begin transition meetings this afternoon, my father continued, not meeting my eyes. Sarah, could you make sure the conference room is prepared? You've always had a knack for organization. A knack for organization. 10 years of 70-hour weeks, 3 major commercial projects managed simultaneously. The downtown development deal that saved us during the recession, reduced to a knack for organization. My hands trembled slightly beneath the table, but I managed a tight smile and a nod. Not because I agreed, but because the alternative was falling apart in front of the very people who had orchestrated my professional execution. Mark leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who has never had to question his place. At 32, 2 years my junior, he had the title I had been working toward since college. His MBA from Wharton apparently outweighed my decade of hands-on experience and relationships with every major contractor in the state. I think this calls for a celebration, Uncle James announced, already reaching for his phone. Reservations at Bellamy's? Everyone nodded enthusiastically, rising from their seats in a flutter of movement and chatter. I remained seated, feeling strangely detached from my body, as if watching the scene unfold from somewhere near the ceiling. You'll join us, won't you, Sarah? My mother touched my shoulder lightly, her eyes both sympathetic and somehow complicit. Family loyalty had put her in an impossible position, caught between her husband's decision and her daughter's disappointment. I should probably get started on setting up that conference room, I replied, injecting a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. Lots to organize. Her face fell, but she didn't push. She knew me well enough to recognize when I needed space. It was one of her better qualities, knowing when to retreat. After they left, I sat alone in the morning quiet of that dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of family dinners past. On the far wall hung a photograph of Grandpa Joe breaking ground on our first major commercial project. He stood smiling beneath a hard hat, his weathered hand gripping a shovel planted in fresh dirt. Beside him, a skinny 8-year-old version of me mimicked his pose with a plastic toy shovel, eyes squinting against the sun, grinning with all the confidence of someone who believed she belonged. That photograph had been my North Star, the reason I'd chosen construction management over law school, much to my father's disappointment. The reason I'd returned to our small town after college instead of taking that offer in Chicago. The reason I'd worked twice as hard as everyone else, determined to honor the legacy of the man who used to sneak me onto job sites on Saturday mornings, teaching me to read blueprints before I could fully read books. My phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "Don't take it personally. Dad just thinks you'd be happier without all the pressure." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd never minded the pressure? That the pressure was the point? That every beam raised and foundation poured had felt like a conversation with Grandpa Joe long after he was gone? Instead, I gathered my things and walked slowly through the empty hallways of our corporate headquarters. The building itself was a testament to growth, from Grandpa's garage to a modest office above the hardware store, finally to this sprawling complex with its custom millwork and statement staircase that I had personally designed. My fingerprints were all over this place, visible to everyone except, apparently, my own family. In my office, would it still be my office? I began methodically sorting through papers. Not because it needed doing, but because it gave my hands something to do besides shake. On my desk sat a small concrete paperweight, my first attempt at mixing the material under Grandpa's supervision. Lopsided and air-bubbled, but he'd kept it on his desk until the day he retired, claiming it was his lucky charm. The memory triggered something, a conversation from years ago, one of our last before the cancer took him. We'd been sitting on his porch, watching a summer storm roll in across the valley where 3 of our largest projects stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. "They don't see you like I do," he'd said suddenly, his voice raspier than it had once been. "Who doesn't?" I'd asked, though I knew. "The others. They see what they want to see." He'd patted my hand then, his skin tissue paper thin over working man's bones. "But seeing isn't the same as knowing. Remember that." I hadn't fully understood what he meant then. I thought he was talking about proving myself, about working harder until they saw my value. Now, I wondered if he'd been trying to tell me something else entirely. My rumination was interrupted by a knock at my door. It was Eleanor, Grandpa Joe's former assistant who'd stayed on long past retirement age, now serving as our office manager. She'd been with the company for over 40 years, her salt and pepper hair the only visible change in her appearance over the decades. "Quite the morning," she said without preamble, sliding into the chair across from my desk. Her eyes, sharp behind cat-eye glasses, assessed me with the directness of someone who had known me since I was a child. "Your grandfather would have had something to say about all this." "Probably something colorful and unprintable," I replied, attempting a smile. "Certainly that." She folded her hands neatly in her lap. "But he also would have told you to check the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the storage room, the one with the project files from 85 to 90. I blinked. At her, confused. Why would I need old project files? Eleanor stood, smoothing her immaculate skirt. "I don't believe I mentioned anything about project files, just the cabinet they're in." With that cryptic statement, she turned to leave. At the door, she asked, "Your grandfather was many things, Sarah, but careless was never one of them. Especially when it came to you." After she left, I sat staring at the space she had occupied, turning her words over in my mind. The storage room was on the other end of the building, a cluttered space filled with decades of paperwork that no one had gotten around to digitizing. I hadn't been in there for years. Curiosity pushed me to my feet. Whatever Eleanor was hinting at, it offered a more productive focus than wallowing in my exclusion. The corridor felt longer than usual as I made my way past the glass-walled offices, where my relatives were already settling into their new roles, some already on calls, others huddled in impromptu meetings. No one noticed me slip past toward the storage room. The space smelled of old paper and dust, illuminated by a single fluorescent light that flickered intermittently. Filing cabinets lined the walls, labeled by year in my grandfather's precise handwriting. I found the one Eleanor had mentioned easily enough, a heavy metal relic with 8590 printed on yellowed tape. The bottom drawer stuck slightly, requiring a firm tug to open. Inside were the expected manila folders, organized by project name. I rifled through them, unsure what I was looking for. Blueprints? Contracts? Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Until my fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the drawer. Something that didn't belong there. I pulled the drawer out further, crouching to look underneath. There, secured with electrical tape that had gone brittle with age, was a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Grandpa Joe's distinctive block lettering. My heart began to race as I carefully peeled away the tape, trying not to damage the envelope. It came loose with a soft ripping sound, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. The envelope was heavyweight, the kind used for important documents, and sealed with wax. An old-fashioned touch that was so characteristic of my grandfather. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and pulled out several folded pages. The top, one was a letter, dated 3 months before Grandpa Joe's death. "My dearest Sarah," it began, his handwriting strong despite his illness. "If you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I'm gone, and the family has done exactly what I worried they might do. They've overlooked you. Not because you lack ability, you have more talent in your little finger than most have in their entire body, but because they've never understood what this company truly is." I sank to the floor, my back against the filing cabinet, and continued, reading. Reynolds Construction wasn't built on degrees or connections. It was built on grit, on showing up first and leaving last, on knowing every nail and beam and concrete pour matters. It was built on trusting your instincts and standing by your word. You learned those lessons. The others learned different ones. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back, unwilling to smudge his words. They think construction is about buildings. You know it's about people. The ones who inhabit the spaces we create, yes. But more importantly, the ones who create those spaces. The workers who trust us with their livelihoods. The clients who trust us with their dreams. This business lives and dies on trust, and you, Sarah, are the only one who truly understands that. The letter continued, his words washing over me, like a conversation from beyond, filling the hollow space that had opened inside me that morning. So here's what I've done. Along with this letter, you'll find documents establishing SR Holdings. On paper, it's a separate investment company. In reality, it's you. I've quietly transferred ownership of the 3 commercial properties on Westfield Avenue to this company. Yes, the ones you helped design and manage construction on. They're income-producing, debt-free, and positioned for long-term growth. The legal work is complete, the transfers recorded. All that remains is for you to present yourself at Gregory and Wyatt Law offices with the enclosed key. They're expecting you, though they may be surprised by when you arrive. I stared at the pages in disbelief, then dug deeper into the envelope. Sure enough, there was a small key taped to one of the documents, along with papers showing the establishment of an LLC with me as the sole owner. This isn't charity, Sarah. It's strategy. Your father and the others see only the construction company. They've overlooked the real estate holdings that generate steady income regardless of construction cycles. I've watched you study market trends, analyze neighborhoods before they gentrified, identify opportunities others missed. You have the vision they lack. They may have excluded you from the family business today, but they've unwittingly done you a favor. While they focus on managing construction, you'll be building an empire of your own, starting with 3 prime commercial properties that generate more annual income than last year's construction profits. One more thing. Eleanor knows about this letter, but not its contents. She's promised to guide you to it if ever the need arose. Trust her. She sees more than most give her credit for. The letter concluded with words that blurred as my eyes. Filled with tears I could no longer hold back. You are my legacy, Sarah. Not the buildings, not the company name. You. Your integrity. Your vision. Your unwillingness to cut corners, literal or figurative. When you build something, it stands. Remember that about yourself, even if others forget. All my love, always, Grandpa Joe. I sat there on the dusty storage room floor for what felt like hours, reading and rereading his words. The pain of the morning's exclusion still throbbed, but alongside it grew something else, a sense of purpose, of direction. Grandpa Joe hadn't just left me property, he'd left me a path forward, one that had been prepared with careful foresight, designed specifically for me. When I finally emerged from the storage room, I walked differently, back straight, steps purposeful. I didn't return to my office. Instead, I walked directly to Eleanor's desk. She looked up, taking in my expression, the envelope in my hand. A small, knowing smile crossed her face. I'll clear your schedule for the afternoon, she said before I could speak. I expect you have an appointment to keep. Thank you, I said, meaning it for far more than just her administrative assistance. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. He always said you were the one who truly inherited his vision. The rest of them inherited his name. I left the building without speaking to anyone else. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from family members wondering where I'd gone, why I wasn't setting up the conference room, whether I'd be joining them for the celebration dinner after all. I silenced it and kept driving. The law office of Gregory and Wyatt occupied the top floor of the city's oldest commercial building, one that, ironically, Reynolds Construction had renovated a decade earlier. I had managed that project working weekends to ensure the historical elements were preserved while modernizing the infrastructure. As I rode the elevator up, I remembered how proud Grandpa Joe had been at the ribbon cutting, his arm around my shoulders as he told anyone who would listen that the project had come in under budget and ahead of schedule, thanks to my granddaughter here. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her professional smile fading to confusion when I gave my name. Oh, we weren't expecting you for... Well, we weren't expecting you yet, she fumbled, reaching for her phone. Let me just inform Mr. Gregory that you're here. A moment later, a tall man with silver hair and tortoiseshell glasses emerged from a corner office. Warren Gregory had been my grandfather's lawyer for decades, though I'd only met him at company functions and later at Grandpa's funeral. Ms. Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. This is certainly a surprise. We weren't expecting to hear from you for some time. I found Grandpa Joe's letter sooner than expected, I replied, watching understanding dawn in his eyes. Ah, he said simply, gesturing toward his office. In that case, we have quite a bit to discuss. Inside his office, with its views of the city skyline, including several buildings bearing the Reynolds name, Mr. Gregory retrieved a thick folder from his safe. Your grandfather was very specific about this arrangement, he explained, laying out documents for me to review. We were to maintain these records until you came to us with the key, at which point we were to assist you in fully assuming control of the assets. I placed the key on the desk between us. I'm still trying to understand the full scope of what he did. Mr. Gregory nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose. Joseph Reynolds was always thinking several moves ahead. When he established SR Holdings... Sarah Reynolds, I interrupted, suddenly understanding the initials. Precisely. When he established it 5 years ago, he structured it as a completely separate entity from Reynolds Construction. The 3 Westfield Avenue properties were developed by the construction company, but sold to SR Holdings at fair market value. Everything was done properly, above board, and, most importantly, quietly. Did my father know? Mr. Gregory's expression turned diplomatic. Your father was aware that your grandfather had divested some assets. He was not made aware of the specific arrangement regarding SR Holdings or its connection to you. I absorbed this information, imagining my grandfather methodically creating this safety net for me, anticipating a future where I might need it. The properties are fully leased with long-term tenants, Mr. Gregory continued. The income they generate is substantial, approximately $1. $8 million annually, after expenses. The accounts have been maintained by our firm's financial division, with the proceeds reinvested according to your grandfather's instructions until such time as you took control. The amount struck me like a physical blow. $1, $8 million annually, from just 3 buildings. While I'd been fighting for recognition within the construction company, Grandpa Joe had quietly set me up with something potentially far more valuable. There's one more thing, Mr. Gregory added, reaching deeper into the folder. Your grandfather left a sealed envelope to be given to you along with these documents. This second envelope was smaller than the first, still sealed with the same wax stamp. I opened it carefully, pulling out a single note card. Remember, it read in Grandpa's handwriting, they build structures, you build legacies. The difference isn't just semantic, it's strategic. Love, Grandpa Joe. Beneath his signature was a postscript that made me both laugh and tear up simultaneously. P.S. Don't tell them right away. Watch and wait. The right moment will present itself, and you'll know it when it comes. Even from beyond the grave, Grandpa Joe was still teaching me, still guiding me with his particular blend of business acumen and psychological insight. I spent the next 2 hours with Mr. Gregory, signing papers and reviewing financial statements. By the time I left his office, I was the active owner of a real estate holding company worth approximately $22 million, with liquid assets of nearly $3 million from the reinvested rental income of the past 5 years. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade as I walked back to my car. My phone, when I finally checked it, had 27 missed calls and over 40 text messages. The family was in an uproar over my disappearance. The conference room remained unprepared. My absence at the celebration dinner was being interpreted as petulance. I scrolled through the messages, a strange calm settling over me. Just this morning, their opinions had seemed all-important. Now, with Grandpa Joe's letters tucked safely in my bag and a new path unfolding before me, their disappointment felt distant, almost irrelevant. The last message was from my father. We need to talk about your role in the company moving forward. Dinner at the house tomorrow, 7 p.m. I smiled slightly as I typed my response, looking forward to it. And I was, though not for the reasons he might assume. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, but I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. I would no longer be fighting for recognition within Reynolds's construction, and when the right moment came, as Grandpa Joe promised it would, I would be ready. I spent the night researching everything I could about real estate holding companies. My dining room table disappeared beneath printouts of market analyses, tax regulations, and property management best practices. Sleep seemed irrelevant compared to the opportunity before me. By sunrise, fueled by determination and too much coffee, I had drafted 3 distinct business scenarios for SR Holdings. Each represented a different strategy: conservative growth, aggressive expansion, or strategic partnership. Grandpa Joe had given me the foundation. The architecture of what came next would be mine to design. The morning light filtered through my apartment windows, casting long shadows across my impromptu war room of documents. I hadn't bothered calling in to Reynolds's construction. Let them wonder. Let them assume I was nursing my wounded pride. The truth was far more energizing. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Your father's asking questions. Says you haven't. answered his calls. I told him you called in sick. You owe me lunch. I smiled, typing back a quick thank you. Eleanor's loyalty was yet another gift from Grandpa Joe, one no legal document could formalize but invaluable nonetheless. Before heading to my parents' house for the scheduled dinner, I drove to the Westfield Avenue properties. My properties. I'd helped develop them, of course, had watched them rise from architectural drawings to finished structures, but I'd never looked at them as an owner. The perspective shift was profound. The first building, a mixed-use development with retail on the ground floor and luxury apartments above, stood at the corner of Westfield and Pine. The facade featured the signature Reynolds construction, limestone detailing, Grandpa Joe's favorite touch, a nod to the historic buildings that had defined the city's original architecture. The second property, 2 blocks down, housed a boutique hotel that had transformed the neighborhood when it opened 3 years ago. I remembered the battles with the historical commission, the compromise solutions I'd engineered that satisfied both preservation requirements and modern functionality. The third was perhaps my favorite, a former warehouse converted into creative office space, its industrial bones honored while accommodating the needs of the tech startups and design firms that had flocked to lease space there. The waiting list for vacancies was over a year long. Standing across the street, watching people flow in and out of buildings I now owned, I felt a surge of something I couldn't immediately identify. Not pride exactly, though that was part of it. Not vindication, though that lingered too. It was something more fundamental, a sense of alignment, of rightness. This was what Grandpa Joe had seen in me. Not just an aptitude for construction management, but a deeper understanding of how the built environment shapes communities, creates value, generates opportunity. My phone rang, interrupting my reverie. It was Mark. "Where are you?" he demanded, without preamble. "Dad's been trying to reach you all day." "Just getting some fresh air," I replied, my tone deliberately casual, preparing for tonight's discussion. "Look, Sarah." His voice softened slightly. "I know yesterday was rough, but you're making it worse by disappearing. The family thinks you're being childish." Does it matter what the family thinks? The question hung between us, so simple, yet so loaded. Mark had always cared intensely about family opinion. It was why he'd gotten the MBA instead of pursuing his interest in marine biology. Why he'd married Catherine, who came from the right kind of family, instead of Mia, whom he'd dated in college and actually loved. Why he wore the same style of watches as our father and joined the same clubs. "Of course it matters," he finally said, sounding genuinely confused. "We're Reynolds. The family is everything." "See you at dinner," I replied, unwilling to debate, a worldview I was rapidly outgrowing. "Don't worry, I'll be on my best behavior." My parents' house, a colonial revival that had been featured in Architectural Digest after my mother's extensive renovation, was lit up like a Christmas display when I arrived precisely at 7. Multiple cars lined the circular driveway. Apparently, this family dinner included the entire executive board. My quiet conversation with my father had evolved into a command performance. I straightened my shoulders before ringing the doorbell. I'd dressed carefully, opting for understated confidence, a charcoal gray suit that spoke of competence rather than fashion, simple gold earrings that had been a graduation gift from Grandpa Joe, hair pulled back in a low chignon that meant business. No armor of flashy accessories or trendy styles. Tonight, I didn't need them. My mother answered the door, her smile tight with concern. "Sarah, darling," we were beginning to worry. "I'm right on time," I replied, kissing her cheek. 7 o'clock as requested. "Yes, well, everyone else arrived early to discuss matters." She ushered me inside, where the murmur of voices from the dining room confirmed my suspicion that this was to be less a family dinner and more a corporate intervention. The conversation halted abruptly as I entered. My father stood at the head of the table, Uncle James and Aunt Caroline flanking him like corporate sentries. Mark sat to his right, the heir apparent's position. My cousins Derek and Eliza occupied the far end, with my mother's empty chair completing the tableau. 8 settings, 8 family members, 7 already aligned in purpose. The stage was set for a gentle but firm explanation of my diminished role. "Sarah?" My father nodded formally. "We were just discussing the transition plan." "I assumed as much," I replied, taking the only available seat, directly opposite Mark, looking straight down the length of the table at my father. Not the position they would have chosen for me, I was certain, but the only one left. Sometimes fate has a sense of humor. Dinner proceeded with the appearance of normalcy. My mother's housekeeper served her famous roasted chicken. Wine was poured. Surface-level pleasantries were exchanged. But beneath it all ran an electric current of tension, of words being measured and withheld. I ate slowly, participated in the shallow conversation, and waited. Finally, as coffee was served, my father cleared his throat, the signal everyone had been anticipating. "Sarah, we've been concerned about your reaction to yesterday's announcements," he began, his tone a practiced blend of authority and paternal concern. "Your absence today was noted." "I needed some time to process," I replied simply. "Understandable," Aunt Caroline interjected, her voice honey-sweet and just as sticky. "Change is always difficult, especially when it affects our perception of our place." I sipped my coffee, letting the comment hang there without response. "The point is," my father continued, "we wanted to assure you that while your role may be changing, your value to the company remains significant." "Does it?" I asked mildly. The question seemed to startle him. He'd clearly prepared for tears, for anger, for bargaining, not for calm inquiry. "Of course it does," he recovered quickly. "Your organizational skills and attention to detail are assets we don't want to lose. We're proposing a lateral move to head of project coordination. You'd work closely with Mark on implementing the projects once they're secured, ensuring they stay on schedule and within budget. A demotion wrapped in diplomatic language. From managing entire projects independently to serving as my brother's glorified assistant. The Sarah of yesterday would have been devastated, would have either fought back with bitter words or capitulated with wounded dignity. But that Sarah hadn't spent the night becoming an expert in commercial real estate holdings, hadn't stood before her own buildings just hours earlier, hadn't felt the weight of Grandpa Joe's legacy and confidence transforming her understanding of her own worth. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, setting down my coffee cup. "But I think I'll be exploring other opportunities." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clink of silverware against china ceased. "What opportunities?" Uncle James asked, his tone suggesting there could be no opportunities of value outside Reynolds's construction. "I've been doing some reflection," I replied, "about what I really want from my career, about the kind of impact I want to have." "You can have impact at Reynolds," my father insisted, a note of genuine confusion entering his voice. "That's what we're trying to tell you. This reorganization isn't about reducing your role. It's about optimizing everyone's strengths. By removing me from project management and client relationships, the areas where I've demonstrated the most success, and relegating me to an internal coordination role?" I kept my tone curious rather than accusatory. "That doesn't sound like optimization. It sounds like marginalization." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah, that's not fair. Dad is trying to create a role that plays to your strengths without..." "Without what, Mark? Without challenging the new hierarchy? Without giving me any real authority or client contact? Without having to explain to our partners why the person who's successfully managed their projects for years has suddenly been replaced by someone with less experience but the right business degree?" The table erupted into overlapping objections. My bluntness had pierced the veneer of corporate speak, exposing the reality beneath. I let them talk over each other for a moment, then held up my hand. "I'm not here to argue," I said when they finally quieted, "or to make anyone feel bad about their decisions. I'm simply informing you that I'll be pursuing a different path." "What different path?" my mother asked, genuine concern in her voice. "You've always been part of Reynolds." "I still have some details to work out," I replied, not yet ready to reveal Grandpa Joe's gift. "But I'll be staying in the industry, just not with the family company." My father's expression darkened. "If this is some kind of negotiating tactic—" "It's not," I assured him. "It's a life decision. Reynolds' Construction is a wonderful company with a proud history, but it's clear that my vision for my future doesn't align with the vision the board has for me." "So you're just going to walk away?" Mark asked, incredulous. "From the family legacy?" I thought of Grandpa Joe's words. "They build structures. You build legacies." The irony almost made me smile. "I'm not walking away from anything," I said. "I'm walking toward something else. Something that honors what I learned from Grandpa Joe in a different way." My father's expression shifted at the mention of his father. A complex mix of emotions crossed his face: respect, defensiveness, perhaps a flicker of guilt. "Dad always did have a soft spot for you," he said, his tone softening slightly. "He saw something in you that reminded him of himself at your age." I took that as a compliment, I replied. "Still do." "As you should," my father nodded. "But Dad also had blind spots. He believed in gut instinct over data, personal relationships over strategic partnerships. It served him well in his era. But times have changed. The industry has changed." "Has it?" I asked. "Or have we just convinced ourselves it has to justify changing our approach?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Uncle James glanced at his watch, subtly signaling that this philosophical detour was taking too much time. "The point," my father said, regaining his corporate demeanor, "is that we'd like you to reconsider. Take the weekend. Think about what Reynolds' Construction means, not just as a company, but as our family's heritage, our shared purpose." I nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "I will. And I hope you'll all do the same. Think about what the Reynolds name really stands for, what Grandpa Joe built this company to be. Ask yourselves if the path you're choosing honors that legacy or simply preserves the appearance of it." The atmosphere tensed again. I had challenged them in a way they weren't accustomed to, not with emotion or demands, but with questions that prodded at the foundation of their certainty. "Well," Aunt Caroline broke the silence, her social instincts kicking in, "this has certainly been a thought-provoking discussion. Margaret, the meal was lovely as always." And just like that, the corporate veneer reasserted itself. Compliments were exchanged. Plans for upcoming social events mentioned. The difficult conversation filed away like an uncomfortable budget. Meeting. Necessary, but best not dwelled upon. As everyone prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside into his study, the room where I had once sat cross-legged on the floor, watching him work and dreaming of the day I'd have an office like his. "I won't pretend to understand your reaction," he said, closing the door behind us. "But I know you well enough to recognize when your mind is made up. If you're determined to leave Reynolds, at least let me help you. I can make some calls, arrange some interviews with firms that would value your experience." The offer was genuine, I could tell. In his mind, he was being the protective father, ensuring his daughter had options even if she rejected the path he'd chosen for her. It was touching, in its way, and utterly insufficient. "Thank you," I said, meaning it despite everything. "But I already have a direction in mind." He studied my face, searching for clues. Something specific then, not just an emotional response to being overlooked. Not overlooked, Dad. Deliberately sidelined. Let's be honest about what happened. He didn't deny it, which was something at least. The board I felt, that your skills were better suited to support functions than executive leadership. Because I don't have an MBA? Because I prioritize the quality of our work over the expansion of our profile? Because I still believe in what Grandpa Joe taught me, that our reputation is built one project at a time, one relationship at a time. Because business isn't just about building things anymore, Sarah, he replied, frustration edging into his voice. It's about market positioning, investor relations, scalable growth models. Mark understands that world. You've always resisted it. I've resisted it because I've seen what happens when companies prioritize those things over craft and care. The quality suffers, the culture erodes, the soul of the business gets hollowed out until all that's left is a name and a logo. That's an oversimplification. Is it? Look at Harmon Brothers Construction. They were our biggest competitor for decades. Then they went public, started chasing quarterly returns instead of quality results. Now they're a subsidiary of a multinational conglomerate, their name relegated to a division label, their founding principles forgotten. My father sighed, running a hand over his face, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported me back to childhood, to the times I'd watch him wrestle with difficult business decisions at the kitchen table. You sound exactly like him, he said quietly. Grandpa Joe? He nodded. He used to make the same arguments against every expansion proposal, every new business approach, always worried we'd lose our way, forget who we were. A rueful smile touched his lips. He was particularly adamant about keeping you involved in key decisions. Said you were the only one who truly understood the Reynolds way. The revelation stunned me slightly. I'd always known Grandpa Joe valued my perspective, but I hadn't realized he'd actively advocated for me behind closed doors. Why didn't you listen to him? I asked, genuinely curious. My father's expression turned complicated. Because sometimes a father has to make difficult choices to protect the future of what he's built. Your grandfather wanted to keep Reynolds's construction, exactly as it was, a mid-sized regional firm with an excellent reputation. I saw the potential for something more. National recognition, larger projects, a legacy that extended beyond our local footprint. And you couldn't see me helping achieve that vision? He hesitated, weighing his words. I saw you preserving what was, not building what could be. Perhaps that was my failure of imagination, not yours. It was as close to an admission of misjudgment as I was likely to get. I accepted it for what it was, not an apology, but an acknowledgement that perspectives could differ without either being entirely wrong. I should go, I said, suddenly tired of excavating old decisions and ingrained perceptions. Thank you for dinner and for the conversation. He nodded, then hesitated. Whatever you decide to do next, Sarah, don't let it be about proving me wrong. Let it be about proving yourself right. The distinction was surprisingly insightful, and it stayed with me as I drove home through streets lined with buildings that bore the invisible imprint of 3 generations of Reynolds craftsmanship. My grandfather's sturdy foundations, my father's ambitious expansions, my own careful blend of tradition and innovation. 3 approaches to the same fundamental mission: to build things that last. We had just defined lasting in different ways. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. Storage room had a visitor after you left yesterday, your brother. Looking for something specific? My pulse quickened. Had Mark somehow learned about Grandpa? Joe's letter? Was he searching for what I had found? Did he find anything? I texted back. Not that I could tell, Eleanor replied. Told him I'd reorganized the filing system last month. He seemed frustrated. I smiled despite my concern. Eleanor's reorganization was likely a convenient fiction, a way to deflect Mark's search without raising suspicion. Thanks for the heads up, I wrote. See you Monday? 3 dots appeared then. Sooner if you'd like. Coffee tomorrow? There are some things about your grandfather's last years at the company that might interest you. Things he asked me to remember. My heart raced. Eleanor had been Grandpa Joe's right hand for decades. If anyone knew his true intentions, his unrecorded thoughts, it would be her. 10 a.m. at Riverside Cafe? I suggested. Perfect, she replied. Bring your thinking cap and maybe a notebook. That night, I spread the SR Holdings documents across my living room floor, creating a physical map of my inheritance. Property deeds, tax records, rental agreements, financial projections. Together, they told a story, not just of assets and income streams, but of foresight and faith. Grandpa Joe had believed in me enough to create this parallel path, this alternative future where I could build something independently, free from the constraints of family dynamics and corporate politics. I wondered when he had first conceived of this plan. Had it been after some particularly frustrating board meeting where his son and his siblings had pushed back against his values? Had he recognized in me not just an affinity for construction, but a philosophical alignment, a shared belief in what business should be? As midnight approached, I gathered the documents, securing them in the fireproof safe I'd purchased that afternoon. Tomorrow would bring new information from Eleanor, new insights into Grandpa Joe's vision. But tonight had already brought clarity about my next steps. I opened my laptop and began drafting a formal resignation letter to Reynolds Construction. Professional, gracious, and absolutely final. I would hand it in personally on Monday morning, closing one chapter and opening another, with the same decisive action Grandpa Joe would have appreciated. As I worked, I felt his presence almost tangibly, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuing influence, a voice of principle and purpose that had shaped my understanding of what it meant to build something worthy of the time invested in. You build legacies, he had written. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand exactly what legacy he had envisioned for me. And then I would build it, beam by beam, decision by decision, with the same care he had taught me to bring to every project that bore our name. Proceed with part 3. Make sure it's 3,500 words per part. Please, I want you to respond every part in a single response only. I don't want to see continue in next part due to length. Please write it in a single response, and don't ask confirmation. Questions if you will proceed or not, because when I tell you to proceed already. Don't ask questions anymore. And always remember that I don't want the story to look like repeating. I don't want the redundancy. Instead, you make it more motivational and inspirational, like creating a scenarios to avoid being redundant. Instead, make it more motivational and inspirational. So proceed now. Riverside Cafe sat at the edge of Milltown's historic district, nestled between a bookshop and an artisanal bakery. The Saturday morning crowd created a gentle hum of conversation beneath the cafe's exposed wooden beams, original timbers from the 1890s factory that had once occupied the space. I'd arrived early, choosing a corner table with a view of both, the entrance and the river beyond the windows. Some habits from construction management never faded. Always position yourself to see what's coming while keeping an eye on the foundation. Eleanor arrived precisely at 10, carrying a leather portfolio that looked as seasoned and reliable as she was. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, her clothing simple but impeccable. She'd dressed the same way for as long as I could remember, practical elegance that commanded respect without demanding attention. You didn't tell them, she stated, rather than asked as she settled into the chair across from me. About SR Holdings? No, the timing wasn't right. She nodded approvingly. Joseph always said you had good instincts for timing, said it was why you ran the smoothest job sites. You knew when to push and when to hold back. The server approached, and Eleanor ordered a black coffee without consulting the menu. I requested a cappuccino, needing both the comfort and the energy it would provide. So, Eleanor began once we were alone again, I imagine you have questions. Dozens, I admitted. When did Grandpa Joe start planning this? Why didn't he tell me himself? Did my father really have no idea? Eleanor took a measured sip of her coffee once it arrived, gathering her thoughts before responding. Your grandfather began considering alternative arrangements about 6 years ago, she said. It was after the Westridge Mall project, the one where your father and uncle wanted to cut corners on the foundation to meet the accelerated timeline. I remembered the project well. It had been one of the first major disagreements between my father and grandfather that had spilled out of the boardroom and into family dinners. Grandpa Joe had insisted on doing the foundation work properly, even if it meant delaying the project by 3 weeks. My father had argued that the client's timeline was more important than what he called excessive precautions. The argument had grown heated, with neither man willing to budge. Grandpa Joe won that battle, I recalled. We reinforced the foundation, according to his specifications. Yes, Eleanor nodded. But it was what your father said afterward that truly concerned Joseph. He told the board that as soon as your grandfather retired, Reynolds Construction would be joining the modern era with more competitive practices. Competitive practices, I repeated, recognizing the corporate euphemism for cutting quality to increase profit margins. Your grandfather recognized then that the company values might not survive his retirement. He began thinking about how to preserve what mattered most to him. Eleanor's eyes met mine, and about who shared his vision, for what Reynolds should represent. Me, I said softly. You, she confirmed. He watched you closely over the next year, how you managed projects, how you interacted with clients and subcontractors, how you insisted on quality even when it would have been easier to compromise. You passed his test without knowing you. We're taking it. The server returned with our drinks. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug, finding its solidity reassuring as I absorbed Eleanor's revelations. The transferring of the properties began gradually, she continued, one building at a time, structured as normal business transactions. Nothing that would raise eyebrows in quarterly reviews. By the time he was diagnosed with cancer, the framework was in place. The diagnosis only accelerated his timeline. Did he ever consider telling me directly? Eleanor's expression softened. He wanted to, but he also understood family dynamics better than most. He knew that if you had this knowledge while he was still alive, it would create an impossible situation for you, torn between loyalty to him and your relationship with your father and brother. The insight was so characteristic of Grandpa. Joe, practical and compassionate simultaneously, always considering the human element alongside the business calculations. As for your father, Eleanor continued, he was aware that your grandfather had divested some commercial holdings, but Jonathan was focused on construction operations, not the real estate portfolio. It was a blind spot Joseph deliberately exploited. She opened her portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. This is the last piece. Joseph asked me to give this to you if you found the first letter and seemed ready for what comes next. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted the envelope. Unlike the previous ones, this wasn't sealed with wax. It was a simple business envelope, with my name written in Grandpa Joe's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single page, not a letter this time, but what appeared to be a list. Names, phone numbers, brief annotations. I looked up at Eleanor, confused. Your grandfather's network, she explained. The people who respected him most, not for the Reynolds name, but for his integrity and vision. Developers who valued quality over cutting corners. City planners who appreciated his commitment to projects that enhanced communities rather than just extracting value from them. Investors who understood the long game. I scanned the list with growing amazement. Some names I recognized. Industry legends, community leaders, influential architects. Others were unfamiliar but accompanied by notes like believes in sustainable development or values craftsmanship over cost. He spent decades building these relationships, Eleanor said. They're as valuable as any property or company, and he wanted you to inherit these connections, not just buildings. This is incredible, I breathed, recognizing the true magnitude of Grandpa Joe's gift. He hadn't just left me properties, he'd left me a foundation for what came next. A carefully cultivated network of like-minded professionals who could help me build something meaningful. There's one name you should contact first, Eleanor said, pointing to a name near the bottom of the list. Victor Hayes, accompanied by the note, the best architect I never got to work with. I don't know him, I admitted. He's relatively new to the area, moved his practice here from Boston about 3 years ago. Joseph met him at a sustainable building conference shortly before his health declined. They connected immediately, shared values, shared vision. They talked about collaborating on something groundbreaking, but time ran out. Her expression turned wistful. It was one of Joseph's few regrets. I folded the list carefully, returning it to the envelope. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything, for being his confidant, for guiding me to his letter, for this. She waved away my gratitude with a small gesture. I believed in Joseph Reynolds for 40 years. Now I believe in you. She hesitated, then added, There's one more thing you should know. I'm retiring from Reynolds Construction. Gave my notice yesterday. The news startled me. Eleanor had seemed as permanent a fixture at the company as the Reynolds name itself. Because of the restructuring? Partly, she acknowledged, but mostly because I promised Joseph I'd help you when the time came. If you'll have me, that is. Emotion welled up unexpectedly. You want to work with me? At SR Holdings? If you're building what I think you're building, a company that values integrity and long-term thinking over quick profits, then yes, I'd like to help get it started properly. Her expression turned mischievous. Besides, someone needs to teach you Joseph's filing system. The man was brilliant, but peculiar about his organizational methods. I laughed, feeling a surge of confidence and possibility. With Eleanor's institutional knowledge and Grandpa Joe's network, SR Holdings could become much more than just a real estate holding company. It could become the foundation for the true Reynolds legacy, not the one currently being reshaped in corporate boardrooms, but the one built on unwavering principles and community impact. When can you start? I asked. I've given 2 weeks. Notice, but your father has asked me to train my replacement immediately. I could probably be available by the end of next week. She eyed me over her coffee cup. That should give you just enough time to set up a proper office and begin reaching out to some of these contacts. We spent the next hour outlining initial steps, securing office space, establishing basic systems, prioritizing which relationships to nurture first. Eleanor's practical mind complemented my more visionary thinking, creating a balanced approach that felt both ambitious and achievable. As we were preparing to leave, Eleanor fixed me with a direct look. One piece of advice, if I may. When you meet with these people, don't lead with your grievances about Reynolds Construction. Lead with your vision for what comes next. Joseph didn't build his reputation on what he opposed, but on what he created. The distinction resonated deeply. This wasn't about proving my family wrong. It was about proving Grandpa Joe right, showing that his values and approaches could thrive in the modern construction and development landscape. I understand, I said, and I think I know where to start. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I drove to Reynolds Construction headquarters for what would likely be the last time as an employee, my resignation letter in one hand, Grandpa Joe's network list in the other. The contrast between what I was leaving and what I was moving toward couldn't have been more stark or more energizing. The office was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. The restructuring announcement had created a flurry of meetings. reassignments, and the inevitable corridor gossip that accompanies corporate change. Heads turned as I walked confidently through the main workspace toward my father's office, my purpose evident in my stride. His assistant looked up in surprise. "Sarah, we weren't expecting you today. Your father's in a meeting with—" "I'll wait," I replied calmly, taking a seat in the reception area. I placed my resignation letter on my lap and pulled out my phone, using the time to research Victor Hayes, the architect Eleanor had highlighted from Grandpa Joe's list. His portfolio was impressive, innovative designs that incorporated sustainable materials and energy-efficient systems without sacrificing aesthetic appeal or functionality. His projects seemed to embody exactly the principles Grandpa Joe had championed: buildings that served communities while respecting natural resources and environmental impact. I was so absorbed in my research that I nearly missed the opening of my father's office door. Mark emerged first, followed by Uncle James and two men in suits I recognized as representatives from Kessler Development Group, a national firm known for rapid construction and equally rapid corner cutting. My father appeared last, his expression shifting from corporate conviviality to surprise when he saw me. "Sarah," he said, recovering quickly. "I didn't know we had a meeting scheduled." "We don't," I replied, standing. "But I wanted to deliver this in person." I extended the resignation letter, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes. "I see." He accepted the envelope, gesturing toward his office. "Would you like to discuss this privately?" "There's nothing to discuss," I said, keeping my tone professional but firm. "My decision is final. I've outlined my transition plan. In the letter, projects I'll hand off, clients I'll introduce to their new managers, documentation I'll complete before my departure." Uncle James eyed me with a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. "Always thorough, our Sarah." My father glanced at the Kessler representatives, clearly uncomfortable having this conversation in front of potential business partners. "Perhaps we could continue this later? Dinner tonight?" "I'm afraid I'm busy tonight," I replied. "But don't worry, my resignation isn't effective immediately. I'll ensure a smooth transition over the next 2 weeks." One of the Kessler men, gray-haired with the tanned complexion of someone who spent more time on golf courses than construction sites, stepped forward with an appraising look. "Reynolds, if you're letting talent like this walk out the door, perhaps we should reconsider our arrangement," he said, his tone making it unclear whether he was joking or serious. My father's smile tightened. "Family business is always complex, Mr. Kessler. Sarah has decided to pursue other opportunities, which we respect." "What opportunities, if you don't mind my asking?" Mr. Kessler directed the question to me, his interest seemingly genuine. "I'm developing a new venture focused on sustainable construction and community-centered development," I replied, seeing no reason to hide my intentions. "Continuing the original Reynolds vision, just under different management." Kessler's eyebrows rose. "Interesting. We should talk sometime. Always looking for fresh perspectives in the markets we're entering." I nodded politely, though I had no intention of aligning with Kessler's approach to development. "Thank you for the interest." My father's expression had grown increasingly strained during this exchange. "Sarah, if you have a moment before you leave today, please stop by my office. I'd like to review your transition plan personally." It was a graceful exit from an awkward situation, and I allowed it. "Of course, I'll come by after lunch." As I turned to leave, Mark caught my arm. "Sarah, wait. Can we talk?" His voice held something I hadn't heard from him in years: uncertainty. We walked silently to the small courtyard behind the building, a peaceful space designed by Grandpa, Joe, who believed every workplace should include somewhere to sit and think in the open air. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, their tentative colors brightening the still cool morning. "So you're really leaving?" Mark said, once we were seated on one of the stone benches. "Yes," I confirmed. "It's time." "Because of me?" Because I got the position you wanted? The question surprised me with its directness and underlying insecurity. Mark had always projected absolute confidence in his rightful place within the company hierarchy. Now, faced with my departure, cracks in that certainty were beginning to show. Not because of you, I clarified. Because of the direction the company is taking, a direction that doesn't align with my values or vision. You mean Dad's direction, my direction. If that's how you see it, yes. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father's that it momentarily disoriented me. What if I told you I have reservations too? About some of the changes, about the Kessler partnership. This was unexpected. You've always supported Dad's growth strategies. In board meetings, yes. In public, yes. He lowered his voice, though no one was nearby. But privately, I've been uncomfortable with some of the recent decisions, the quality compromises, the shift toward mass production over craftsmanship. I studied my brother's face, searching for signs of manipulation or strategic positioning. Found none. Just genuine concern and what appeared to be a desire for validation. Then why go along with it? I asked. You're the new executive VP. You have influence. Mark laughed, but the sound held no humor. Do I? Dad selected me because he believes I share his vision completely. The moment I start pushing back, I'll be just as sidelined as you were. Except I don't have your skills or experience to fall back on. Construction management is all I know, Sarah, and I'm not even that good at it. Not like you. The admission was startling in its vulnerability. For the first time, I glimpsed the weight my brother had been carrying, the burden of being the chosen successor without the natural aptitude for the core business. So, what will you do? I asked, genuinely curious. Try to steer things from the inside, I guess. Make small adjustments where I can. Hope Dad comes around before we damage the Reynolds reputation beyond repair. He hesitated, then asked, What will you do? Really? I considered how much to reveal. Mark and I had once been close, before corporate politics and family dynamics had created distance between us. Perhaps it was time to bridge that gap, at least partially. I'm starting a new venture, I said. Focused on the kind of development and construction Grandpa Joe believed in. Sustainable, community-centered, built to last generations, rather than just until the warranty expires. With what resources? The question wasn't challenging, just practically curious. I have some assets, I replied vaguely. And Grandpa Joe left me more than just memories and that concrete paperweight. Mark's eyes widened slightly, connecting dots I hadn't explicitly drawn. The Westfield properties? The ones that were sold off before he retired? Those went to you somehow? I neither confirmed nor denied, just offered a small smile. Let's just say I have a foundation to build upon. He shook his head, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. He always did believe in you more than the rest of us. Said you had the true Reynolds spirit. He believed in what I stood for, I corrected gently. The principles I upheld. It wasn't about favoritism, Mark. It was about values alignment. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning sun warming the courtyard around us. Birds hopped. Between plantings, unconcerned with human power struggles and corporate transitions. I wish you weren't leaving, Mark finally said. The place will be less solid without you, less grounded. The compliment, awkwardly expressed but genuine, touched me unexpectedly. Maybe we can find ways to collaborate in the future, I offered, when our values align on specific projects. I'd like that. He stood, straightening his suit jacket in a gesture that seemed both professional and like armor being adjusted. And Sarah, whatever you build next, make it something Grandpa would be proud of. That's the plan, I assured him. The only plan that matters. After Mark left, I remained in the courtyard, reflecting on our conversation. It had revealed something I hadn't anticipated, that the company's new direction wasn't as unanimously embraced as it appeared. Mark's doubts suggested potential fracture lines in what had seemed like a united front against Grandpa Joe's principles. I filed this information away, neither planning to exploit it nor dismiss it. In the construction world, knowing the underlying structural conditions was always valuable information, even for a building you weren't planning to enter again. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical tasks, organizing files, documenting, ongoing projects, preparing transition notes for whoever would inherit my responsibilities. I approached each task with professional thoroughness, determined to exit with the same integrity I'd brought to every aspect of my work at Reynolds Construction. My meeting with my father was brief and surprisingly free of drama. He accepted my resignation with a formal professionalism that felt like its own kind of acknowledgement. We discussed logistics rather than emotions, focusing on client transitions and project handovers rather than the deeper fracture this represented in our relationship. Only at the end, as I turned to leave his office, did he drop the corporate facade momentarily. "Sarah," he called, his voice softer than it had been during our meeting. "Whatever you're building next, don't burn bridges you may someday want to cross again." I paused at the door. "I'm not burning bridges, Dad. I'm building new ones. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just remember that the Reynolds name opens doors." "So does quality work and ethical business practices," I countered. "Grandpa Joe taught me that." A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or even regret, crossed his features. Yes, he certainly proved that principle over his lifetime. It wasn't an admission that he had strayed from those principles, but it was an acknowledgement of their power and validity. I accepted it as the closest thing to a blessing I was likely to receive. "Goodbye, Dad. I'll see you at Mom's birthday dinner next month." He nodded, already turning back to the papers on his desk, returning to the world he understood, the world of profit margins and growth projections and strategic partnerships. A world I was now free to redefine on my own terms. As I drove away from Reynolds Construction for the last time as an employee, I felt a curious lightness, not the bitter satisfaction of escape, but the buoyant potential of new beginnings. The resignation letter had been more than a formality. It had been a declaration of intent, a commitment to building something aligned with my deepest values. I drove directly to the address Victor Hayes had listed on his website, a renovated warehouse in the arts district that housed his architectural firm. No appointment, no formal introduction, just the kind of direct approach Grandpa Joe had always favored when he recognized a kindred spirit. The receptionist looked startled when I introduced myself and asked to see Mr. Hayes, but something in my manner, or perhaps just the Reynolds name, prompted her to pick up the phone instead of offering the standard, "Do you have an appointment?" response. "Mr. Hayes, there's a Sarah Reynolds here to see you. Yes, from Reynolds Construction." She listened for a moment, then looked up at me with new interest. "He'll be right out." Victor Hayes wasn't what I expected. In my mind, I'd pictured someone older, perhaps a contemporary of Grandpa Joe's. Instead, the man who emerged from the studio area was perhaps in his early 40s, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and the intensity of someone who lived primarily in the world of ideas and possibilities. "Ms. Reynolds," he extended his hand, "this is an unexpected pleasure. Your grandfather spoke highly of you." The reference to Grandpa Joe, so direct and immediate, confirmed Eleanor's assessment. This was indeed a connection worth pursuing. "Mr. Hayes," I replied, shaking his hand firmly, "I believe you and my grandfather discussed collaborating on something groundbreaking before his health declined. I'm here to explore whether that conversation might be continued with me instead." His eyebrows rose in interest. "Direct. Joseph mentioned that about you as well." He gestured toward the studio area. Why don't you come in and tell me exactly what you have in mind? As I followed him into a space filled with architectural models, sustainability diagrams, and the creative energy of designers intent on reimagining the built environment, I felt Grandpa Joe's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a continuing influence, a foundation upon which something new and worthy could be constructed, beam by beam, relationship by relationship, vision by vision. The meeting with Victor Hayes stretched from a planned 15 minutes to nearly 3 hours. By the end, we had outlined the framework for a pioneering project, a mixed-use development on one of the vacant lots adjacent to my Westfield Avenue. Properties: sustainable materials, community-focused design, spaces that fostered connection rather than just consumption. Exactly the kind of project Grandpa Joe had always dreamed of building, but had never managed to fully realize within the constraints of a company increasingly focused on conventional metrics of success. This could be something special, Hayes said as we wrapped up, studying the rough sketches we'd produced. A statement project that demonstrates how development can serve communities rather than just extract value from them. That's exactly what I want, I replied. Not just a building, but a blueprint for a different approach, one that honors the past while creating a more sustainable future. He nodded, understanding the deeper significance. Your grandfather would have loved this. He talked about wanting to leave a legacy beyond just buildings, a different way of thinking about what construction could achieve. That's the legacy I intend to build on, I said, starting with this project. As I drove home that evening, the spring sunset painting the sky in shades of possibility, I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced since Grandpa Joe's passing. The path forward wasn't just about properties or projects or even principles. It was about purpose, about using the foundation he had provided to construct something worthy of his vision and values. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. Joseph didn't build his reputation on what he opposed, but on what he created. I was no longer fighting against my family's new direction for Reynolds Construction. I was building an alternative, a demonstration, that my grandfather's approach wasn't outdated but visionary, not old-fashioned but timeless. The realization filled me with an energizing clarity. This wasn't about being excluded from the family business. It was about being entrusted with something more valuable, the true heart of what that business had once represented and could represent again, under different stewardship and a different name. SR Holdings, I decided, would soon become SR Development, not just maintaining properties, but creating new ones. Not just preserving Grandpa Joe's legacy, but extending it into a future he had glimpsed but hadn't lived to see. The exclusion that had once felt like rejection now revealed itself as the redirection I needed, away from a company losing its foundational values and toward the creation of something authentically aligned with the principles that mattered most. 6 months can transform landscapes, both physical and personal. The autumn morning air carried a crisp energy as I walked the perimeter of what we now called the Confluence, our first major development project under SR Development. The ground had been broken, foundations poured, and the first structural elements were rising from the earth like steel promises. Workers moved with purposeful energy across the site, their hard hats catching the morning light. Several nodded as I passed, recognition in their eyes. Not just of my position, but of my presence. I'd been on site nearly every day since construction began, working alongside them when decisions needed to be made, not just issuing remote directives from a distant office. The south-facing solar array supports came in, called Juan, our site foreman. They're exactly what Hayes specified, aircraft-grade aluminum with the enhanced load capacity. I smiled, grateful for the update and for Juan himself, an experienced foreman who'd left Reynolds Construction to join my fledgling company, bringing with him decades of expertise and a team of skilled workers who shared our vision for quality-focused construction. Perfect timing, I replied. The panels arrive next week. The confluence had evolved from those initial sketches with Victor Hayes into something remarkable, a mixed-use development designed to bring together sustainable innovation, community needs, and economic viability. The ground floor would house local businesses with reduced rents for first-time entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. The second and third floors featured flexible office spaces designed for collaboration, and the residential units above incorporated affordable housing alongside market-rate apartments, all built to the same exacting standards with energy-efficient systems that would reduce utility costs for all residents. Every element of the project embodied Grandpa Joe's philosophy: build for the community, build for the future, build relationships alongside structures. We'd engaged local suppliers whenever possible, hired apprentices from the technical college's construction program, and designed public spaces that would serve as genuine community gathering points, not just decorative afterthoughts. Most importantly, we were building it right. No cut corners, no compromised materials, no rushed timelines that sacrificed quality for speed. The construction might take 3 months longer than a conventional approach, but the result would stand as a testament to different priorities, different values. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. City Planning Commission just unanimously approved Phase 2. Congratulations. A surge of satisfaction warmed me, despite the autumn chill. Phase 2, the renovation of a historic warehouse into a community innovation center, had faced initial skepticism from some commission members concerned about altering a historic structure. Our proposal, which preserved the building's industrial character while transforming its functionality, had apparently won them over. "That's 2 for 2, Juan commented, reading my expression accurately. First, the confluence, now the innovation. Center, the Reynolds touch still works. The SR development touch, I corrected gently. Different name, same principles. He nodded, understanding the distinction. Your grandfather would have loved this place. He always said buildings should serve people, not the other way around. You knew him well? I asked, realizing I'd never inquired about Juan's history with Grandpa Joe. 20 years working together, he confirmed. Started as a carpenter, on his crews, worked my way up. He's the one who sent me to management training, said I had an eye for quality that couldn't be taught. These connections continued to surprise and move me. The network of lives Grandpa Joe had touched, the careers he'd nurtured, the values he'd instilled in people throughout the construction community. His legacy lived in these relationships, as much as in buildings or business principles. Mr. Hayes is here, called one of the junior site managers, pointing toward the entrance where Victor's distinctive silhouette was visible, blueprint tubes slung over his shoulder like a quiver of architectural arrows. I excused myself to greet him, our twice-weekly site meetings having become a highlight of my professional life. Victor's brilliant design sensibilities complemented my practical construction knowledge, creating a partnership that elevated both our work. He pushed the boundaries of what was possible. I ensured those boundaries were solidly constructed. Sarah, he greeted me with his characteristic intensity. I've been thinking about the rooftop garden design. What if we expanded the communal growing spaces and incorporated a rainwater collection system that could sustain them even through dry periods? No pleasantries, no small talk, just immediate immersion in the creative problem-solving that defined our collaboration. I wouldn't have it any other way. Show me what you're thinking, I replied, already mentally calculating load requirements and infrastructure modifications. We spent the next hour walking the site, fine-tuning elements of the design in real time as construction progressed around us. This integrated approach, architect and builder in constant communication, adjusting and refining as the structure took physical form, represented a departure from the traditional handoff model where architects delivered plans and builders executed them with minimal interaction. The result was a more organic process that allowed for continuous improvement and adaptation. As we finished our site walk, Victor paused, surveying the emerging structure with evident satisfaction. "This is how building should be," he said. "Collaborative, responsive, guided by shared purpose rather than just contractual obligations." Exactly what Grandpa Joe used to say, I noted. He believed the relationships between the people building something were as important as the materials they used. Wise man, Victor nodded. Speaking of relationships, have you given any more thought to my proposal? The proposal in question wasn't personal, but professional. Victor had suggested merging our companies, creating an integrated design build firm that would handle projects from initial concept through completed construction. It made sense on many levels, formalizing a partnership that was already functioning smoothly in practice. But I'd hesitated, protective of the independence I'd fought hard to establish. "I'm still considering it," I replied honestly. "The idea has merit, but I want to be certain it's the right move for both our firms." He nodded, respecting my deliberation. "No rush. The right foundation takes time to set properly." The construction metaphor wasn't lost on me, one more reminder of how thoroughly building principles had infused my worldview. After Victor departed for another appointment, I retreated to the job site trailer that served as our field office. Eleanor had transformed the utilitarian space into something remarkably efficient and comfortable, with project timelines displayed alongside inspiring images of completed sustainable developments from around the world. A framed photograph of Grandpa Joe breaking ground on his first major project held a place of honor on the main wall, a reminder of our company's spiritual foundations. "You've got a visitor," Eleanor informed me as I entered, her tone carefully neutral in a way that immediately alerted me that something significant was afoot. "Your brother's been waiting for 20 minutes. Quite patient, actually." Mark sat in our small conference area, looking simultaneously out of place in his tailored suit and strangely at home among the construction documents and material samples. He rose when he saw me, his expression a mixture of professional composure and personal uncertainty. "Impressive operation you've got here," he said, gesturing toward the large site plan on the wall. "Word around town is that the confluence is going to set new standards for sustainable urban development." "That's the goal," I replied, still trying to assess the purpose behind this unexpected visit. Mark and I had maintained minimal contact since my departure from Reynolds Construction, occasional exchanges at family gatherings, but nothing resembling our former closeness. "What brings you to our dusty corner of the world?" He glanced at Eleanor, who took the hint with characteristic discretion. "I'll go check on those supplier invoices," she said, retreating to her desk on the other side of the trailer. Once we were relatively alone, Mark's corporate facade softened slightly. "I'm here with a proposition, actually. A potential collaboration between Reynolds Construction and SR Development." The suggestion was so unexpected that I momentarily struggled to formulate a response. "Collaboration? On what?" "The Riverwalk Project," he said, naming the city's ambitious plan to redevelop 2 miles of neglected riverfront property into parks, commercial spaces, and community amenities. "The RFP dropped yesterday. It's massive, too big for either of our companies to take on independently." I knew about the project, of course. Everyone in the local development community had been anticipating it for months. The opportunity to reshape such a significant portion of the city's landscape came along perhaps once in a generation. But I hadn't expected Reynolds Construction to consider partnering with my upstart firm, especially given the circumstances of my departure. "Why us?" I asked directly. "You could partner with any number of established firms. Why SR Development?" Mark met my gaze squarely. "Because nobody knows riverfront construction in this region better than you do. Because your work on the confluence has everyone talking. And because—" He hesitated, then pushed through. "Because Dad's approach isn't working anymore." That admission caught me by surprise. "What do you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair in that characteristic gesture that mirrored our father's. "The Kessler partnership has been a disaster. 3 projects with significant quality issues, cost overruns despite the corner cutting. Client satisfaction at an all-time low. He shook his head. Everything Grandpa Joe warned would happen, happened, and now we're struggling to secure new contracts because our reputation has taken a hit. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in Reynolds Construction's difficulties. Too many good people worked there. Too many families depended on its success. Dad's too proud to admit it publicly, Mark continued. But the board acknowledges we need to change direction. Return to our roots. Rebuild our reputation for quality and reliability. He leaned forward, earnestness in his expression. That's why this partnership makes sense. Your approach, Grandpa Joe's approach, combined with our resources and infrastructure. Together, we could create something exceptional for the Riverwalk. The proposal stirred conflicting emotions, vindication that Grandpa Joe's principles had proven their worth, concern about entangling my flourishing company with the very organization I'd left behind, curiosity about whether genuine change was possible in a company still led by my father. What does Dad think about this idea? I asked, cutting to what seemed like the crucial question. Mark's expression revealed the complexity of the situation. He's coming around. The board pressured him to consider all options for the Riverwalk. Bid. When my team proposed this partnership, he didn't dismiss it outright. That's progress. I nodded, understanding the family dynamics at play. And the terms of this partnership? Would SR Development maintain design control and quality standards? Joint oversight, Mark proposed. Equal decision-making authority. Your standards for materials and methods, our logistics and workforce capacity. The proposition had merit, I had to admit. The Riverwalk project was indeed too substantial for SR Development to take on alone at our current size, and the opportunity to demonstrate our approach on such a visible project was compelling. I'll consider it, I said finally. Send over the RFP and your partnership proposal. I'll review them with my team. Relief flickered across Mark's features. Thank you. I think this could be good for both companies, a chance to bridge certain gaps. The construction metaphor wasn't lost on me. Maybe. But Mark, I won't compromise on quality or sustainability standards. Not even for the Riverwalk opportunity. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied, and I believed him. Whatever our differences, Mark had always respected my professional judgment, even when corporate politics had prevented him from supporting it publicly. After he left, I sat contemplating the scale model of the confluence that dominated one corner of the trailer. 6 months of intensive work had transformed an abstract vision into physical reality. Steel rising, spaces taking shape, principles manifesting in concrete form. It was deeply satisfying in a way I'd never fully experienced at Reynolds Construction, where projects had increasingly become about timelines and profit margins rather than lasting impact. Eleanor approached, coffee mug in hand, her expression questioning without being intrusive. Mark wants us to partner with Reynolds on the Riverwalk project, I explained. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting. A reconciliation of sorts? More like a pragmatic alliance, I clarified. They need our reputation for quality. We could use their resource capacity. And how do you feel about that? Eleanor asked, demonstrating once again her gift for cutting to the heart of matters. I considered the question carefully. Conflicted, cautiously intrigued, a bit vindicated. She nodded, understanding. Partnership doesn't have to mean compromise. Sometimes it's about leverage, using combined strengths to achieve something neither could accomplish alone. Grandpa Joe would say it depends on the foundation, I mused. If both parties are building on solid principles, the partnership can stand. If not, it eventually collapses. Joseph would also say, Eleanor added with a knowing smile, that sometimes the best way to change a system is from within. The observation struck home. Was this what Grandpa Joe had intended all along? Not just for me to build something separate from Reynolds Construction, but eventually to influence its return to founding principles. The possibility felt both daunting and strangely right, a completion of the circle, a restoration rather than merely a divergence. I need to think about this carefully, I said. The Riverwalk is too important to risk on a partnership that might dissolve over philosophical differences. Of course, Eleanor agreed. But don't overthink it. Your instincts have guided you. Well, so far. That evening, I drove to the river that gave our city its character, parking near the section designated for the Riverwalk development. The area was largely neglected now. Abandoned warehouses, overgrown lots, the skeletal remains of a long-defunct factory. But the potential was undeniable. The water reflected the setting sun in ripples of gold and crimson. Herons waded along the shoreline, undeterred by the urban decay. Nature persisted, ready to be incorporated into whatever human vision might reshape this space. I walked slowly along the riverbank, envisioning what could be created here. Parks that honored the water rather than walling it off, buildings that respected the natural landscape while serving human needs, spaces that brought community together rather than privileging private interests. The Riverwalk could be transformative for the city if done right, a model of sustainable urban renewal that balanced economic vitality with environmental stewardship and social cohesion. The principles that would guide such a project were clear. To me, the same principles Grandpa Joe had instilled, the same vision that had shaped the confluence. The question was whether those principles could survive a partnership with Reynolds Construction in its current state. Whether my father, despite his resistance to change, might finally recognize the wisdom in the approach he had increasingly dismissed as outdated. As twilight deepened around me, I realized I'd walked farther than intended, all the way to the old Milltown Bridge, an elegant stone structure built in the 1920s that still stood as a testament to craftsmanship and durability. Grandpa Joe had often pointed to it as an example of construction that transcended mere functionality to become a civic landmark, a source of community identity and pride. They don't build them like that anymore, he'd say, not as a lament, but as a challenge. But they could. We could. If we remembered that we're not just putting up structures, we're creating a legacy that will outlive us. Standing in the shadow of that bridge, I felt a moment of clarity about the decision before me. The Riverwalk project represented an opportunity to demonstrate, on a significant scale, that Grandpa Joe's approach wasn't just idealistic, but practical, that quality, sustainability, and community impact could coexist with financial viability. Whether that demonstration happened through SR development alone or through a partnership with Reynolds Construction was secondary to ensuring the project embodied the right principles. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. The screen showed Victor's name. "I heard about the Riverwalk RFP," he said without preamble when I answered, "and about Reynolds Construction approaching you for a partnership. News traveled fast in our professional community." "Word gets around," I acknowledged. "I have thoughts," he stated, characteristically direct, "about how we might approach this, with or without Reynolds." "I'm listening," I replied, curious about his perspective. "Meet me at the office in an hour? I've been sketching some initial concepts since the RFP details became public. I think you'll find them interesting." The eagerness in his voice was contagious. "I'll be there." By the time I arrived at Victor's studio, he had transformed one wall into a vision board for the Riverwalk. Conceptual sketches, precedent images, and sustainability diagrams arranged to tell a visual story of possibility. His team of designers huddled around tables, already translating rough ideas into more refined drawings. The creative energy in the space was palpable. "I've been thinking about this project for years," Victor admitted as he guided me through the concepts. even before the city officially announced plans for redevelopment. The potential of that riverfront has always fascinated me. His vision aligned remarkably with mine, respecting the river's natural systems, incorporating the area's industrial heritage rather than erasing it, creating diverse spaces for community gathering and engagement. The designs were preliminary but compelling, balancing innovation with feasibility in exactly the way successful projects required. "This could be extraordinary," I said, genuinely impressed. "But the scale is immense. Even combining our firms, we'd be stretching our capacity to execute something this ambitious." Victor nodded his acknowledgement of this reality. "Which brings us to the Reynolds question. What are you thinking about their partnership proposal?" I shared my conflicted thoughts, my concerns about philosophical alignment, my cautious hope that the company might be ready to return to its founding principles. Victor listened thoughtfully, then offered a perspective I hadn't fully considered. "What if this partnership isn't about compromising your vision to accommodate theirs, but about extending your influence to transform their approach?" "You think that's possible?" I asked, struck by how closely his suggestion mirrored Eleanor's earlier observation about changing systems from within. "I think," he replied carefully, "that your grandfather created SR development not just as an alternative to Reynolds construction, but as a demonstration of what Reynolds could be again. The question is whether they're ready to learn from that demonstration." The insight resonated deeply. Perhaps this was indeed what Grandpa Joe had envisioned. Not a permanent separation, but an eventual restoration, with his philosophy proven through independent success and then reintegrated into the company that bore his name. "So you think we should pursue the partnership?" I asked, wanting his unvarnished opinion. "I think," Victor said, with the measured consideration that characterized his approach to important decisions, "that we should develop our own comprehensive vision for the Riverwalk first. Get clear on our non-negotiables. Then approach the partnership from a position of absolute clarity about what we stand for and what we can contribute." His advice made perfect sense. Establish our foundation first, then determine whether a joint structure could be built upon it. The construction metaphor felt particularly apt. "Let's do it," I decided. "Your design team, my construction expertise, a shared vision for what the Riverwalk could be. We'll create a proposal that embodies everything we believe in. Then we'll see if Reynolds Construction is truly ready to build something different." As I drove home that night, the path forward felt clearer than it had in months. The Riverwalk project wasn't just another development opportunity. It was a potential turning point, a chance to demonstrate on a significant scale that the principles Grandpa Joe had championed weren't obsolete, but essential for creating built environments that served communities for generations. Whether that demonstration happened in partnership with Reynolds Construction or in competition with them would depend on their readiness to rediscover their own foundations. But either way, the legacy Grandpa Joe had entrusted to me would continue, to grow, to evolve, to transform not just physical spaces but the very approach to creating them. They had excluded me from the family business, yes, but in doing so, they had inadvertently set me on a path to preserve and extend its most valuable aspects. Not the Reynolds name, but the Reynolds way. Not the corporate structure, but the core philosophy that had made it great to begin with. Grandpa Joe's secret letter hadn't just given me buildings and assets. It had given me purpose, direction, and the opportunity to demonstrate that his vision hadn't been left behind by progress, but was itself the definition of true progress, building not just for today's profit, but for tomorrow's possibilities. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.